everybody. Thanks for coming here. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the Muslim people for their hospitality under ongoing colonial and racial violence. My first task is to introduce what we're doing here, what the plan is. Basically, we're giving an outline of our course, and we have divided the tasks. So Sharon will share with you the rationale for the course, and then me and PowerPoint. And then Vanessa and I will share with you what we are calling performative mappings, and then Sharon will close our part of this exercise, giving you the course information, and then everybody else will join in with your questions, answers, complaints, all kinds of things you're allowed to do.
So this course was organized around our shared desire to put into sustained pedagogical practice some of the ideas and experiments that we examine in our scholarly work and non-scholarly areas of our lives. So you'll hear more about the details about these ideas and experiments and practices from Vanessa and Denise. But I wanted to share and set the scene, the course rationale that we originally proposed and which guided the course development. So, Black queer feminist poet and scholar Jackie Alexander argues that our visceral sense of interdependence has been mutilated by colonialism. She states that the material and psychic dismemberment and fragmentation created by colonialism produces a yearning for wholeness, often expressed as a yearning to belong, a yearning that is both material and existential, psychic and physical, and which, when satisfied, can subvert and ultimately displace the pain of dismemberment. She suggests that strategies of membership in coalitions, like those of citizenship, community, family, political movements, and nationalism, solidarity and identity or ideology, although important, have not addressed the source of this yearning. For Alexander, these coalitions have reproduced the very fragmentation and separation that she identifies as the root of the problem. She states that the source of this yearning is a deep knowing that we are in fact interdependent, neither separate nor autonomous. She explains, as human beings, we have a sacred connection to each other, and this is why enforced separations wreak havoc on our souls. There's a great danger, then, in living lives of segregation, racial segregation, segregation in politics, segregated frameworks, segregated and compartmentalized selves. What we have devised as an oppositional politics has been necessary, but will never sustain us, for while it gives us some temporary gains, which become more ephemeral the greater the threat, which is not a reason not to fight, it can never ultimately feed that deep place within us, that space of the erotic, that space of the soul, that space of the divine. So when framing this course, we heed Alexander's warning about the dangers of enforced separations, and draw from the critiques of modernity advanced by feminist and queer scholars like Gloria Anzaldúa, Audre Lorde, Gayatri Spivak, and Denise. More specifically, this course includes pedagogical strategies and conceptual tools grounded on the acknowledgement of ontic material entanglement. These are designed to prepare students to examine and address the sources of intersectional violences within modernity. Grounding the pedagogical approach of this project is Spivak's idea of education as an uncoercive rearrangement of desires toward an ethical imperative toward the other before will. Entanglement in this pedagogical approach functions as a conceptual, practical, methodological tool that teaches the effects of intersectional violences by denaturalizing the separation that they presume. Teaching against violence in this way makes two interconnected moments. On the one hand, entanglement allows an approach that denaturalizes intersectional violence. The presupposition of ontic material inseparability immediately exposes the naturalizing of violence as an effect of colonial, gender, racial, sexual difference as a modern mechanism of domination. Thus, rather than imparting knowledge and information related to what students should desire, we propose to draw students' attention to how desires are allocated through the naturalizing of difference within modernity and how this allocation leads to both material and existential poverty. In this sense, the invitation is to untrap our imaginary. As Anzaldúa states, the struggle is inner, Chicano, Indio, American Indian, Mojado, Mexicano, immigrant Latino, Anglo in power, working class, Anglo, Black, Asian. Our psyches resemble the border towns and are populated by the same people. The struggle has always been inner and is played out in outer terrains. Awareness of our situation must come before interchanges, which in turn come before changes in society. Nothing happens in the real world unless it happens first in the images in our heads. On the other hand, entanglement also sustains a critical approach that both exposes the effects of naturalizing violence and the redesigning of teaching itself as a radical praxis. More specifically, we aim to enable students to develop a hyper-self-reflexive approach in observing these struggles and desires at work within and around us. Our aim is to equip students to hold in tension political and existential questions, to learn to unlearn, to listen, to be disarmed, to dissenter, and to start to imagine otherwise in their personal and professional practice. Because entanglement immediately also denaturalizes the self-determined subject of desire, of learning, of teaching, this course will enable students to name the limits of the quest for certainty, innocence, and control, and to support them to wrestle with our collective libidinal attachments and entrapments in modern forms of subjectivity that deny our entanglement with others and with the world itself. Instead of only teaching students about theories and theorists whose work inspired the creation of this course, the project intends to capture students' imagination through analyses of popular culture, identity-crafting narratives, recurrent patterns and dynamics of critique. We design opportunities for students to develop vocabularies and tools for contextual and self-analysis through case studies, storytelling, and workshops. We'll focus on the possibility of hospicing modernity through a commitment to examine the effects of its onto-epistemic grammar, Cartesian selfhood, individual autonomy, and teleological rational dialectical thinking, and to experiment with alternative ways of knowing and being through affectability, relationality, contingency, immediacy. In this spirit, we would like to experiment with creation of a pedagogical space that mobilizes a collective sense of self-sufficiency and other indispensability. This is based on Audre Lorde's sense of difference as a fund of necessary polarities between which our creativity can spark. Lorde continues, only then does the necessity for interdependency become unthreatening. Only within that interdependency of different strength, acknowledged and equal, can the power to seek new ways of being in the world generate the courage and sustenance to act where there are no charters. Within the interdependence of mutual differences lies that security which enables us to descend into the chaos of knowledge and return with the true visions of our future, along with the concomitant power to effect those changes which can bring that future into being. Difference is that raw and powerful connection from which our personal power is forged.
Thank you, Sharon. So to complement what Sharon has talked about, here is our pedagogical framework for the course. So we talked about this word with/out, the modern subject, which indicates that we're working through the modern subject to its margins to invite people to the possibility of going beyond that. So we're talking about political and existential or ethical pedagogical experiments that decenter, disarm, and displace our desire and our attachments to linear time, logocentrism, dialectics, the Cartesian ontological securities that keep ourselves in place. So this, the displacement, decentering, and disarming is especially targeted at the security derived from the perceived stability of signifiers that we have. This is difficult because the modern subject within all of us, this kind of pedagogy, it undermines the sense that we know who we are, that we are self-transparent, that we're self-authored, and that we are in control of our self-image, which is what the modern concept of identity and agency are based upon. So once we start to decenter, disarm, and displace, the idea is to learn to relate beyond separability, identity, knowledge, and understanding, learning to find ontological security somewhere else. So I think the basic concept here is that our politics has been colonized also by modern concepts where we relate to others through knowledge or through identity. There's something that mediates our relationships. And this is challenged by non-anthropocentric relational ontologies of entanglement, which say that we have always and always will be connected, right? There's no disconnection. What has been severed is our sense of connection with each other. And this sense of connection has been severed by a specific way of knowing and a specific way of being. So the course is trying to displace us or take us to the edges of our modern ways of knowing and our modern ways of being to invite us to imagine something different. But we can't imagine something different if we haven't interrupted our satisfaction with the securities that we have from that space, from the modern ontological space. So there's no guarantee that we can get anywhere with this. Let me be very clear. It's always an invitation, right, to this kind of work. So I'm going to show you two of the many tools that we're going to use in the course, just as an example of that, and then Denise is going to show as a third one. So I'll start with this one. And remember that when we're talking about displacing logocentrism, when we use maps, generally we think about maps, we think about representation. And there are discussions in geography about non-representational or post-representational cartographies. So we're trying to work in that area, and it's really hard because we are over-socialized in logocentrism, right? So it's very easy to go back to what we're used to. So the pedagogical experiments I'll show you, they have the stated objective of not representing or describing reality, of not creating reality, but of mobilizing different relationships that we can have with knowledge and with reality itself. So it doesn't describe, it doesn't create, it mobilizes different forms of relationships between us and language, us and knowledge, us and real. So that's the caveat. So the first mapping that I'm going to show is about theories of change. So it's a pedagogical mapping where we look at three spaces of perceptions of change. The first one is a soft reform, which is about making the same world a little better through personal transformation and individual action. So you hear a lot, recycle, help, be a hero. We're thinking here about individually focused analysis, the single story of progress and development, simple solutions, and self-affirming strategies that bring a lot of comfort to people. So we're talking about same questions and same answers. From this space to the next space, we have a recognition of epistemological hegemony. And then we have the radical reform space, which is about making the same world a lot better by including more people, voices, and perspectives in collective action. So here we have reduce, rethink, include. We have also recognition, redistribution. So here we have systemic and historical analysis, a step deeper. Multiple perspectives, self-implicating analysis, complex solutions, and a lot of this idea that we need to engage with discomfort. Here we have same questions, different answers. But between this space and the next space, we have a recognition of ontological hegemony. And we have the beyond reform space. So here we say the system cannot be just expanded. So modernity, modernity is not a solution for the problems that modernity has created. Here we have disinvesting in the current unsustainable world and walking with others into the possibility of new worlds. Here the slogan would be imagine the impossible, because from where we stand we can't see what's going to be. So systematic and historical analysis go a step further because they are not calibrated by our desires to see the same world reproduced again. They are not calibrated by our futurity. And ourselves in it, this desire to have hope that this can continue. We realize the false promises and contradictions of modernity, and there's the undoing of the modern structures of being. So here we have different questions and different answers. And there's more over here too. So the recognition of metaphysical enclosure and so on and so forth. So what's important about the map are the stories, if you're looking at it from a post-representation perspective, are the stories we can we can craft about it. So one story that we can use about this map is that this is a linear process of knowledge accumulation. So first, if you have a lot of ignorance, you are in a soft reform, then you get a little bit more knowledge, radical reform, a lot more knowledge, beyond reform. So that's a linear story of knowledge accumulation, which is a legitimate story. And then education in this sense is just about imparting knowledge, right, to people. So that's one story. The next story is that we all know this is unsustainable and violent. The system, for us to have what we have here, we have necessarily to impart violence on others. And arguing for this to be expanded actually doesn't do away with this violence, right? So we already know that we're doomed, but we can't deal with that. So we hold on to whatever is going to be self-affirming, or whatever is going to guarantee our futurity, or whatever we can, actually, because we don't want to open the can of worms. If that is the case, the issue here is denial, or foreclosure, rather than lack of knowledge. Which means that educationally, if you're dealing with denial rather than ignorance, what happens is that once you put the knowledge that is denied in front of people, what do you think is going to happen? Right? There's a huge pushback, right? And people are not going to want to hear that. So if you're dealing educationally with denial, it's very different from dealing with a lack of knowledge, right? And there's another story saying it's a bit of both. The next story says that the linearity here of the beyond reform, putting the beyond reform over here and the linearity of the map is also deceiving, because other ways of being are around us all the time. It's just that we have a difficulty acknowledging and putting it into our frames of thinking. So when you go see the sunset for a second, we allow ourselves to existentially surrender to the moment, and then the next second, we're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner, right? So those moments of surrender, actually, allow us to be part of other ways of being, rather than it being something that requires us to be on this side of the map. So anyway, why do we then don't acknowledge these other ways of being? And that's related to the question of Spivak, of the allocation of desires. The next map, which is Boxhead, talks a little bit about that. So this is our way of representing within us, and making fun of, too, the Cartesian subject. So we're representing the Cartesian subject as a huge box head with a very small body. And here you have Jack Alexander's idea of the erotic, the aesthetic, the divine. We included the hilarious and the more than human over here. So what do these things mean? I think therefore I am is in the middle. Dialectical means it's good, therefore it isn't bad. Utility maximizing, I benefit, therefore I'll do it. Logocentric, I say, therefore it is. Evolutionary, I rock, therefore you suck. Anthropocentric, it's the world, therefore it was created for me. Allochronic, I'm here and now, therefore you're there and then. Teleological, I plan, therefore it will be. Universalist, I name it, therefore that's all there is, right? So there are, again, different stories about Boxhead. One of the stories is that there is a box, and there's an inside of the box and an outside of the box. And that's a productive story, because you can think, for example, about love, inside and outside of the box, identity inside and outside of the box. You can think about activism, politics, justice, you name it, inside or outside of the box. That's a good story. But that's a story, that's another story. There's another story that's a little bit more interesting, I think. And that is actually an insight from Jack Alexander, that we're not the box. There's no box, actually. If we think about ourselves as the line that draws the box, there's no box, right? And then we can see that the desire for an outside of the box comes from within the box, yeah? So if we are the line that draws the box, then the question changes, because then we have to ask, why do we keep drawing the same thing over and over and over again? And there are different explanations for that. But one of them is that because we haven't learned yet what this has to teach us. So if you look at Boxhead as a trickster teacher, we actually need to be more rational to get to the limits of rationality, right? So we need to see what it is trying to do. And we need to interrupt our satisfaction and imagine that this is all there is. And then we can start to draw something different. So we have other pictures of Boxhead. This is the picture that talks about the angles of the box, futurity, entitlement, autonomy, innocence, disidentification, identification, enjoyment, coherence, immunity, security. And we have a few papers dealing, explaining the origins and tracing back this angles to the histories of colonialism, racialization, capitalism, but I'm not going to enter this discussion here. This is my last picture of Boxhead, and it's the one that I like the most. These are the dreams of Boxhead. So Boxhead wants a magic mirror, you know, the Snow White one, that says, you were the most beautiful, right? The desire for self-affirmation, and I'm talking about me here, too, right? Because it's alive. The desire for self-affirmation is up and running, right? The idea that there is a holy grail, the light that we're going to see and then show everybody else, it comes up too. Superhero, right? That we're gonna do it in solid grounds, that we are on solid grounds, that our theories, our activities, we can be beyond critique, right? And that we know and we are self-transparent to represent ourselves as who we really are. So these are all desires coming from within the box. And the question is, what else can we desire? If these are the desires allocated by modernity for us, what else is possible? So I'll pass now to Denise.
Alrighty. Yeah, so I'm not going straight into that. I think we can have the box hat up here, because what I have to share is basically a way of trying to do the work that we do as academics, but not only as academics, that does not reproduce the box hat, does not redraw the box. So if we think that when we draw the box, actually that line takes a certain shape or it has a certain nature, let's say temporal, right? Temporal thinking, then if we trace that line as a temporal one, then the assumption is that we are always going to redraw the box hat. But what if, instead of engaging in the kinds of analysis, critical analysis we do of modernist violence, of heteropatriarchal, colonial racial violence, what if we did not begin with temporal thinking? What if we could think differently, imagine the world differently? So my proposal, and I think I talked a bit about that when I presented the other day, is that it's something that I'm calling poetical thinking, compositional thinking. And compositional thinking begins by the assumption that the things we use for thinking, for analyzing what goes on around us, they are already the prime matter, the materia prima for our thinking. And that when we go about doing analysis, instead of fitting what we are seeing inside of those different boxes that the box head can only produce, what if we took those elements of thinking and arrange them in a particular way? So the way I'm proposing allows us to do two things. On the one hand, dissipate the separations that force us to look at history, for instance, and find distinct locations. So there was colonialism, and then there was new colonialism, and now we are in globalization, and things that happened at those different times, they are not related. So what if we look at all those moments of racial, colonial, heteropatriarchal violence, and instead of seeing this linear evolution, which is composed of discrete moments, what if we just looked for what is in common in there? And instead of having a simplified view of all that's happened, what if we looked at what has happened, what's happening, and perhaps what is yet to happen by anticipating certain common configurations. So thinking in this way will mean that instead of sequentiality, instead of looking for the evolution or transformation or progression, or the opposite, we actually look for symmetries, for similarities. So I have a short example to share with you. So I have these texts that I prepared for the Liverpool, this year's Liverpool Biennale. It's going to come out in the book the curators are putting together. And what I do in this text is actually look at two events. One was a revolt aboard of the slave ship called Unity in 1770, in June 1770. Actually, there were several slave revolts aboard of the ship. And the other is from an uprising that took place in Liverpool in 1981. And as usual, it happened in a mostly black neighborhood, and it happened after the police arrested a young black man using the violent ways in which the police. Yes, yeah, we can have both of them at the same time. So So here, these quotes are from, is the BBC News report on, the report was from 2011, but it's about what happened in 1981. And this is from the captain of the ship, Captain Norris. So we look at what each does. So there was a horde of people who wanted to kill a police officer. This Mr. Potts is a police officer. I just remembered 3 or 4 times during that night thinking, I'm not getting out of here. A couple of older officers came up to me and said that a Bob is being killed, somebody's had the leg chopped off, somebody's being decapitated in a spade. None of that happened. So those are things that he heard as he came into the scene. A couple of older officers, it was a frightening situation before we even started. The sergeants tried to do their best with their own men, but very soon it just became complete chaos, he said. The good thing now is no police officer will ever be put in a position where they can get injured so badly. It was the turning point where police tactics changed. That's from 1981. And then this here is from Captain Norris's logs. The slaves attempted to force up the paintings in the night with the design to murder the wives and drown themselves, but were prevented by the watch. In the morning, they confessed their intention, and the women as well as the men were determined, if disappointed, of cutting off the wives to jump overboard. But in case of being prevented by their irons, were resolved as their last resource to burn the ship. Their obstinacy put me under the necessity of shooting the brain leader. Now, 200 years apart, 1770, 1981. How do we read these episodes without thinking, oh, that was a slave ship revolt, and now we have a neighborhood revolt in the face of police violence? First, I look, we don't have everything, do we? No. Oops, we don't have all of it. So first, the first move is to look for similar pieces. Liverpool is the home of both the neighborhood where the uprising took place and the ship Unity. So they both occurred in response to circumstances of total violence, enslaving and killing, police killing, because somebody was also killed by the police officer during the 1981 revolt. Both pieces describe the situation as one in which the white persons involved, the ones responsible for total violence, were in a life-threatening moment. But in both cases, because I forgot to say about the 1981 one, only the black persons died, because here after, during the uprising, a young black man in the neighborhood was killed. So it was, the young black man was David Moore in the neighborhood, Totef neighborhood, and then here in 1977 was the ring leader in the Unity. So like every black insurrection registered during and after slavery, these insurrections respond to a circumstance of total violence perpetrated by those with immediate economic or juridic involvement in that oppressive situation. So here we have the police as agents of the state, self-protecting agents of the state, initiating the violence, and here we have, with a juridic investment, and here we have the captain of the slave ship who had both economic investment, because he was protecting himself from his cargo, and then at the same time protecting his cargo, and also a juridic authority over those aboard of the ship. This moment is then reading for correspondences. So you see these passages in bold. Reading for correspondence, I find that Captain Norris has an economic investment and juridic control over his cargo. But looking closely at Norris and the police juridic power, I find that in spite of the temporal and spatial distance, 1770, 1981, Atlantic Ocean, and Liverpool, both have the same function as captain and slaveholder. Norris functioned as a law enforcer, a police for the slave trade on behalf of the merchants, while the police officers in Liverpool enforce the law for capital on behalf of Liverpool shop owners. That is, both do something that's vital for capital from the outset. They are protecting property. In this reading, these spatial temporally isolated episodes are entangled as they become iterations of what I'm calling, in this piece, the racial event, each exemplifying how racial violence always consistently protects property, the juridic economic relationship that joins by the hip state and capital. Though capital has shape-shifted over the past 500 years or so, the ethical force of property, that which authorized total violence in both cases, has remained fundamentally the same. For global capital deploys the juridic economic architectures that sustain merchant capital and industrial capital, that is, that which assured the the architectures that have assured the expropriation of the productive capacity of native lands and enslaved bodies, which, as we know, constitute the life and blood of capital. So the difference here in terms of reading, so temporal thinking, when we approach this situation in terms of temporal thinking, this that happened 200 years ago has nothing to do with our capitalist present. But when we look at the ways in which total violence, killing, torture, but mostly killing, is deployed in order to protect both property, both when property is that which is threatening you, in the case of the slave ship, or when property is that which is being threatened by those who have been expropriated, we find that racial violence or total violence we find total violence operating in both times, in the colonial moment as colonial violence, and in the present as racial violence.
Okay, so once it's finalized, more information for the course will be on the GRSJ website, but we just wanted to give a bit of more logistical information now so you can start thinking about if it fits with your interests and your schedules. So as we mentioned in the course theorization, we will have seminars and reading groups and other learning experiments that go beyond the intellect. Some of the classes will happen at UBC, others will take place in other parts off campus. We will have readings from Audre Lorde, Jackie Alexander, Tiffany Latabo King, Fred Moten, Eve Tuck, Aishan Frawley, and others. And the course is going to be open for undergraduates and graduate students, slightly different requirements for each. So regarding the course objectives, by the end of the course, we hope students will be able to identify the relationships between modernity's violences, systems of knowledge, and structures of being, discuss the differences between separability and entanglement and their implications for different forms of sociality and solidarity, resituate yourself in relation to the project or projects of decolonization, and explain the practical application of the concepts and experiments of the course in a particular field. And then, well, is it just the dates?
This is
So yeah, the course will happen in June, and we'll have a week of intensive classes, and then a reading week, and then another week of intense classes. So every day during the week from 5 to 8, and then on Saturdays from 10 to 4.